I apologize. I was having some technical problems. I hope that you'll be able to hear me. I'd like to do something a little different right now. Usually on WebYeshiva, things are not very interactive, but I'd like to begin and ask you to participate a little bit at least. I want to show you a short video, two and a half minute video. And I'd like to ask that after the video, if everybody can go into the chat window, just share your reactions. Just what you thought of it. I'm not gonna give any leading questions. And then after that, I'll read everyone's reactions with each other. And if anybody wants to open their camera and say something, that would be great also. Okay, so if you've been on for a few minutes, you heard me talking with Ezra here about the technicals. I hope this is going to work. Okay. I'm going to, can someone just open your camera for a second or something, or put in the chat that this is actually working? Or Ezra, can you tell me if this is working? You see the video?
Yeah, I see it.
Okay, I'm going to start it. So I'm going to ask everybody, please just watch this video. The video's in Hebrew, there's English subtitles. And then I'll just ask you to write a sentence or two in the chat, sharing your thoughts.
תשעה באב, התעוררנו עד שהבנו, הרומאים התחילו לשרוף את המקדש. תוך רגע הם מילאו את הרחובות, התחלנו לשמוע צעקות מרחוק, אז סגרנו את החלונות, נעלנו את הדלתות וישבנו בשקט בלי להוציא מילה. ואז צרחות מהבית ליד.
הבנו שפרצו לבית של השכנים שלנו. משפחה נחמדה, האבא היה המוהל של הקהילה, הוא עושה לבן שלי את הברית. שמענו אותם צועקים עד שלא שמענו יותר כלום. חשבנו לברוח ליער, אבל כל מי שניסה לברוח גילה שפשוט אי אפשר.
הם חיכו ברחובות ותפסו כל מי שיצא החוצה מהבית. השלג התערבב עם הדם. אנחנו חיכינו שמישהו יבוא לעזור לנו. המשטרה, הצבא, מישהו, אבל אף אחד לא בא. התפללנו לאלוהים, אבל גם הוא לא בא. הרגשנו כל כך לבד. ואז הם באו ודפקו אצלנו על החלונות, אז מהר לקחנו את הילדים, תפסנו אותם, רצנו לכיוון הגג. יכולנו לראות את כל הבתים מסביב, הכל אש, הכל שרוף. ראינו את הפנים שלהם, של האנשים שעד אתמול קנינו אצלם ירקות, הופכים חיות אדם.
הם היו באקסטזה, הם ניפצו את החלונות הראווה, ראיתי אותם שורפים את החנות של אחותי, אחר כך עולים ושורפים את הבית כנסת, והכל היה מלא עשן וסמוכיות, לא חשבתי שבני אדם מסוגלים לעשות דברים כאלה. זה היה כאילו להסתכל על הרוע האנושי בעיניים.
הם ידעו בדיוק לאיזה בתים להיכנס, כי הם סימנו אותם בצבע אדום. הקטנה שלי שאלה אותי אם הם הולכים לרצוח גם אותנו. לא ידעתי מה להגיד לה. אמרתי לה, לפחות אנחנו ביחד.
כולם שואלים אם נצליח לחיות עם זה. אנחנו חייבים איכשהו להמשיך הלאה, לאט לאט, להתחיל לבנות מחדש.
את כל מה שהם הרסו, את כל מה שהם שרפו.
את המשפחות, את הקהילות, את העם.
אנחנו לא הולכים לשום מקום. אנחנו נמשיך לחיות פה.
נמשיך לחיות בשביל כל מי שאיבדנו, בשביל הילדים שלנו. אנחנו נהיה בסדר.
לפנים עמוק, אני יודעת את זה.
רק אם הייתי יכולה לראות עוד פעם אחת את אחותי.
את הבן שלי. את אח שלי.
את האחיין שלי.
את אבא שלי.
את אמא שלי.
רק עוד חיבוק אחד.
Okay. So, רגע. Okay. So if I can ask in the chat for reactions. Everybody please write a sentence, 2 sentences on your thoughts. And then if anybody wants to share also live, I would love that. Just tell me what you thought. Nobody's writing anything. Maybe people, I'll give it a minute. Sashans. Okay. Nothing changes. Embarrassingly naive. Okay, I'm curious what that means if you want to clarify. Nothing changes. The more things change, the more the same. Chilling as always. Sounds like Simchat Torah over and over. Same story over and over. Cyclical nature of Jewish history, Galut. The same things keep repeating. You can use the same words to describe multiple tragedies. Tragedy seems to recur, yet we survive and move on. Nothing has changed, unfortunately. Anybody want to share anything live? Okay. On the one hand, I think the video, as you all saw, I saw this video a few days ago. My daughter showed it to me. And it certainly makes a very powerful statement the way it was done. Basically, one conversation that spans time and space, and it's always the same situation. And that's really the deep message of Tisha B'Av, as we see in the keynote that we said this morning, or that those in North America maybe are still saying now. It's basically one story, one tragic story that begins with Chet HaMeraglim, begins with that first Tisha B'Av, with the 5 tragedies listed in the Mishnah that happened on Tisha B'Av. And throughout history, they showed Berlin and Kishinev and Baghdad. But they could have shown Spain, and they could have shown... And it's the same story. And it's a story that we are used to sitting around on Tisha B'Av and, bringing it all the way up to the Holocaust and saying, in our own generation... But that's not exactly our own generation. The Holocaust ended about almost 80 years ago. And I think that until this year, more or less, we all felt that we were beyond this. But adding at the end of the video, Kfar Aza 2023, continuing the story from Berlin and from Cologne and from Kishinev, it tells us that we're not completely beyond it. That part is very clear. And if it wasn't clear to us a year ago, it's clear to us now. And yet, I was curious if anybody would have said this. I didn't see this in the chat. But to me, it's very clear that the video, which was very well done and made a very powerful point, was also missing something. Because there is one crucial difference between the last scene, the young woman from Kfar Aza, and every single one before that. That difference was not clear on Simchat Torah, October 7th. On that day, there was a pogrom in Kfar Aza and in Be'eri and in the whole area around the Gaza Strip, which looked exactly like all those earlier ones. The only difference is the identity of the enemy, but their tactics, their purpose, and our helplessness were the same. But within a few hours of that moment, and certainly within a few days, the difference became clear. We fought back with an army, a Jewish army, in an independent Jewish state. And although the question of how this was able to happen, if we have such a powerful army and all of that, that's a question that we're all going to have to be asking for a very long time. Hopefully soon, at least, Oh, somebody just put something else in the chat. For me, the last scene was emotionally more strong and in our own country. Okay. All right. Thank you. That was the point I was trying to make. The question of how it was able to happen is going to have to be asked on two levels. It has to be asked, of course, on an earthly level. There will be at some point a commission of inquiry and what mistakes were made and why and who's responsible and what can we do to change. That's very, very important. And we have to ask that question. We also have to ask on a heavenly level how such a thing was possible. Without taking anything away from the responsibility of the people whose errors may have led to this, there's something so incomprehensible about it that I think we have to view it also as divine providence. But in either case, it's important to realize that whatever happened that put us back for a few hours to those horrific scenes of helpless Jews and has continued to keep us in a very, very difficult and painful war, the differences and the significance of that difference, I think, is very, very powerful as well. And that's what I'd like to explore with you. And now let me tell you how this shiur came about. Amichai from WebYeshiva called me a couple of weeks ago. And he asked me, I've given already 4 or 5 years each year on Tisha B'Av. And he asked me if I would speak on Tisha B'Av again this year. I said, okay, I have to think what to talk about. I've spoken about several different stages in the destruction of the first Beit HaMikdash in Tanakh and the second Beit HaMikdash. He said, well, I actually have an idea for this year. And his idea was very close to the title that you see there on the screen, Aftermath, National Healing. He said, we're in a situation this year, Amichai said to me, that we've been in before. We're in the aftermath of a tragedy, of absolute destruction. And we're all trying to say, where do we go from here? How do we move on from this? And there's been a lot of talk everywhere about how this Tisha B'Av is somehow different than previous Tisha B'Avs. We feel, all of us, very, very clearly and instinctively that we're not only mourning the past, and we're not primarily mourning the past, we're mourning the present. So maybe we can look back to our past. Maybe we can gain some wisdom from our ancestors and how they dealt with situations like this. Maybe we can go back and ask the people. And here, the end of the video did pick up on that, right? We can ask the people from Berlin and from Kishinev and from Cologne and from Yerushalayim. What do you do afterwards? So that's what Amichai suggested. I liked the idea immediately, but his original title was slightly different and I asked him to change it. He wanted to call this Aftermath, National Healing After Churban or something like that. And I said, don't use the word Churban, use the word Calamity. Because I wanted to capture that distinction. I wanted to put that young woman from Kfar Aza on the one hand in a situation where she can look back to the man from Baghdad and to the man from Cologne and to the woman from Yerushalayim 2,000 years ago and ask them and learn from them. And I also wanted to put her in a different category and not lose sight of that crucial difference and how to navigate that. So national healing following calamity. And what I'd like to do in the next few minutes, therefore, is to do exactly that. I'd like to go back to the past, and I'd like to explore some examples from each category. How our ancestors knew how to move on after Churban, after destruction, total destruction. And also some examples of something that was less. It was a Churban for individuals. What happened in the Gaza Strip area this year, certainly there have been thousands of families who've been destroyed by this, and communities. Kfar Aza had a Churban. But on the national level, it's still different. This is a calamity, but it's a calamity that's not a total destruction. And we have examples in the past of that as well. So what I'd like to do is to go backwards in time. And I'll start with the most recent of the events that I'd like to talk to you about. And that brings us to Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai. I have the I have the a source sheet up on the screen. If people would like, I think there's a way to share it, but I don't know how. So if it would be helpful, I don't know how to do it, so I'm not going to do it. I'll just share it with it on the screen. If anyone wants afterwards, I'll be happy to send out or to upload this source sheet. Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai was one of the main scholars in the days of the second Beit HaMikdash, during the Churban of the second Beit HaMikdash. I spoke about him in a previous year here on WebYeshiva. And what we have here on the screen is a well-known Gemara in Masechet Gittin. Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai himself was in Yerushalayim during the siege, when the Romans had come and were surrounding Yerushalayim, getting ready to destroy it. And there's a whole story, I'm sure many are familiar, I won't go into now, how he managed to get out of the city. He smuggled in a coffin, and he got to meet Vespasian, or Aspasianus, as he was known in Greek, and therefore in the Talmud, was the Roman general who was about to become the Roman emperor. In fact, according to the Talmudic account, Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai is the one who informed him that he had just been appointed emperor, and he, at that point, was going to leave Yerushalayim and go back to Rome to assume the throne of the emperor, and he left his son Titus to finish the job. Titus, of course, also later went on to becoming an emperor. And the Talmud, so we'll pick up the story here just at that moment after Vespasian has found out that he's about to become the emperor, and he's about to leave, and he says, Amar le, Vespasian says to Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, Mezel azilna, I'm going now, ve'ina shachrina mishadrana, and I'm sending someone else. I'm going to send my son to finish the job. But Rabbi, you've impressed me, so if you ask me for something, give me a request, I will accept, I'll grant your request. Amar lei, Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai said, if it's okay, I'd like to ask for three things. Ten li yavne v'chachameha, v'shulshita de Rabban Gamliel, v'asveta de Messiah le Rabbi Tzadok. He asked for three things. He asked for, most importantly, Yavne v'chachameha. Yavne was where Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai had already moved the Sanhedrin, the spiritual national leadership of the people that had been in Yerushalayim, perhaps understanding where things were headed. Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai had evacuated them all to Yavne. And he said to the emperor, spare Yavne and its sages. V'shoshilta de Rabban Gamliel. Rabban Gamliel, who was the Nasi, the head of the Sanhedrin at the time, who was a descendant of David HaMelech. In other words, preserving the line from which the Mashiach eventually spare the line of Rabban Gamliel. And the third request was very interesting. And there's a discussion also afterwards in the Gemara, which is very significant, but not for now, about whether Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai did the right thing or the wrong thing, whether he should have asked to spare the Beit HaMikdash. And I believe a few years ago, you can go back and check the archives, we had a whole shir on that. But what I want to focus on now is his request for Yavne v'chachameha, because that request was granted. And the Beit HaMikdash was not spared. As we know, Yerushalayim was destroyed. The inhabitants of the city were massacred or taken away as slaves. The Romans crushed the rebellion. But afterwards, Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai went to Yavne, and he began to rebuild. And we have here a number of Mishnayot from Masechet Rosh Hashanah that describe a number of the new laws that were passed when Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai gathered everyone together in Yavne, and after him Rabban Gamliel, who followed him. They made all sorts of decisions there in Yavne. And they made a bunch of new laws, mitzvot Rabbanan. And if you look at the laws, Takanot Ribaz they're called, the laws of Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, and if you examine them, you'll see that there are, in fact, a number of, basically two themes that run through most of the enactments of Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai in Yavne. And you can see our first lesson of how you move on. What do you do after a Beit HaMikdash, which had been standing for, Chazal say, 420 years, according to the rabbi, according to modern historians, it was actually longer than that. Hundreds of years.
Excuse me,
has been destroyed.
You're totally blurry. Your video is
I'm
totally
sorry.
You're
I'm having internet problems. I'm sorry. I'm actually on a cellular connection because the internet in my house is down. So unfortunately, this is the best. I hope it's this is the best the technical situation allows me right now.
Thank you.
All right. So if we look at Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, if we look at his takanot, we see two major themes. I'm not going to get into the technical details of each of these, but for example, when Rosh Hashanah comes out on Shabbat, as we know, you don't blow the shofar, but in the Beit HaMikdash, they actually did blow the shofar on Shabbat in the Beit HaMikdash. And it says here, do you see my pointer? I hope you see this. Mishecharav Beit HaMikdash, Hitkin Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, Shiyu Tokim B'chol Makom Sheyesh Bo Beit Din. Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai said, okay, we don't have Yerushalayim anymore, so anywhere a Jewish court you can blow on Shabbat. But Rabbi Elazar says, no, that's not what he said. Lo Hitkin Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai ela b'Yavne bilvad. There's a debate about exactly where, but the point is, what used to happen in Yerushalayim is going to happen now wherever there's a large center, or maybe in the one large center in Yerushalayim. And it talks about other things where, on the one hand, Yerushalayim was halachically different from Yavne, but some of the things that used to take place in Yerushalayim were now going to take place in Yavne. Also, the next Mishnah that's over here. Sorry. So, fine. Thank you for that. Okay, so for Kiddush HaChodesh, in order to create Rosh Chodesh, witnesses are supposed to come and say that they saw the new moon. They used to go to Yerushalayim. Technically, if there is no Yerushalayim, they can go anywhere that the head of the Sanhedrin happens to be at that moment. But Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai changed it. He said, no, they have to come to Yavne, or to wherever the Makom Avad is, wherever the center of Jewish authority is at this time. In other words, what's Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai trying to say to the people? We don't have Yerushalayim anymore. And we're going to have, and that situation may be for a long time. I don't know if they thought it would be 2,000 years. But we don't have Yerushalayim, we don't have the Beit HaMikdash, and that might not change so quickly. And we're going to have to continue in this new reality. We don't have Yerushalayim, we can't replace Yerushalayim, and over here, we're going to make sure that some of the laws always show that it's not Yerushalayim. But we have Yavne. And in some ways, Yavne is going to have to replace Yerushalayim, even though it can't replace Yerushalayim. And so, it's also at this time period that our formalized tefillot in that generation of Yavne and in the generations afterwards, our formalized tefillot, the Beit Knesset, which is an institution, the synagogue, which is an institution that had been in existence already, but its purpose changed. It wasn't originally used for tefillot. There weren't set prayers. You didn't go to daven mincha in shul when there was a Beit HaMikdash in Yerushalayim. That started now. It's here that we said that they said that the Beit Knesset is going to have to become the Mikdash Ma'at. We're going to have something that we can take with us into exile. And is going to replace. So that's on the one hand. On the other hand, though, there are certain of the takanot, certain of the enactments of Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai that had a very different purpose. For example, here, Barishona haya lulav nita b'mikdash shiva u'v'medina yom echad. We're familiar that on Sukkot we take the arba minim, the lulav and the etrog and the hadas and the arava, all the days of Sukkot except for Shabbat, but for 7 days. But really, according to the halakha, that's not the way it's supposed to happen. It's supposed to be that in the Beit HaMikdash, it's taken all 7 days, but in all of the rest of the world, we're really supposed to take the lulav only on the first day of Sukkot. And that's what the Mishnah says here. Barishona haya lulav nital b'mikdash shiva u'v'medina yom echad. Outside the Mikdash, only 1 day. Mishacharav Beit HaMikdash. But after the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed, Hitkin Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, Sheyehei Lulav Nital B'Medina Shiva Zecher LeMikdash. Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai said, what we're going to have to do now is we're going to have to create a Zecher LeMikdash. We have to do something to help people remember the way things used to be in the Beit HaMikdash. So there they used to do it for 7 days. We're going to do it for 7 days everywhere, not just in Yavne, everywhere. And there are other Yom HaNeit Kulo Asur is a little bit more technical. I won't go into it, but what's important about it is that It's an enactment that was made because Mehera Yibaneh Beit HaMikdash. We have to keep alive the hope that the Beit HaMikdash will be built very, very soon. And therefore, we're going to act in certain ways that are going to enable us to quickly adjust to the new reality that we're hoping will happen soon, where we have the Beit HaMikdash again. So taken together, there are two ideas here that on one hand are sort of contradictory or pulling in opposite directions. On the one hand, we have these takanot that are telling the people, we have to learn to live without a Beit HaMikdash. Now we have Yavne and not Yerushalayim, and we're going to go into Galut, and we're going to have Batei Knesset instead of the Beit HaMikdash, and we're going to have to do things differently because we don't have that anymore. And there's been a Churban, and that Churban is not going to be reversed necessarily, at least, for a very long time. And therefore, we have to learn how to continue to adjust to the new reality. And Zeichel HaMikdash. At the same time, we're going to remember the Beit HaMikdash. And we're going to make sure that we don't forget about it. We're going to constantly be thinking about it and studying about it. And we're going to make sure that we're ready even on a practical level to pick things up should the Beit HaMikdash be rebuilt speedily, even very, very quickly. Okay, so that's our first example. And that's after a total Churban. That's how Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai looked the reality in the eyes. He didn't just sit down and cry. I'm sure he did. But he didn't just sit down and cry. Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai said, we're going to have to look reality in the face. We're going to have to face this reality, and we're going to have to grapple with it. Now let's go back to an earlier period in time. That was the second Beit HaMikdash. Ezra, I need your technical help here again. This is a multi-page. I'm not used to this platform. I use it only once a year with WebYeshiva. I apologize. Okay, I'd like to now go back to the days of the first Beit HaMikdash. That was the second Beit HaMikdash. Now let's go back to the days of the first Beit HaMikdash. And very quickly, I just want to give you a historical overview that will be relevant to us. So what I'm very quickly, and I'll refer back to this maybe in a few minutes as well. So let's just pick up here. I have here a chart of approximately the last 150 years of the days of the first Beit HaMikdash. First Beit HaMikdash stood for 410 years, if I remember correctly, and this is the last 150 years of it. Who were the kings? So first we have the king Chizkiyahu, who ruled for 29 years. He was Melech Yehuda in Yerushalayim. As I'm sure you know, after David and Shlomo, who ruled over the whole country, we split into two kingdoms. There was Malchut Yisrael in the north and Malchut Yehuda in the south. So Chizkiyahu was king of Yehuda, and when he became king, there was still a king in Israel, but in the 6th year of his reign, the kingdom of Israel was destroyed by the Assyrians, and 10 tribes were taken to exile. That's Chizkiyahu. We'll talk about him towards the end of this year again, because we're going backwards in time. After Chizkiyahu came his son Menashe. Menashe ruled for 55 years, longer than any other king, and he also has the dubious distinction of being the worst of all of the kings from a moral and spiritual perspective. I believe it was 2 years ago here on WebYeshiva I gave a shiur about Menashe. He's a little bit more complicated, as we showed then, than you might sense from first glance. But in any case, Menashe ruled for 55 years. He's viewed as evil, at least on a simple level. The Tanakh seems to blame him for the Churban completely. He actually, as we talked about 2 years ago, he did repent 22 years into his reign, according to the Gemara there, and according to the Psukim in Divrei Yamim. But that's Menashe, 55 years. After Menashe, there's another 55 years or so. His son Amon, who rules for only 2 years, and then Yoshiyahu, who I spoke about last year here on Tisha B'Av, who ruled for 31 years. And Yoshiyahu was the last attempt, really, to try to turn things around from a spiritual perspective and to avert the Churban that had been predicted already in Menashe's days. Yoshiyahu went on a whole campaign. He rid the country of idolatry, and he tried to get the people to return to the Torah, and perhaps even tried to bring the 10 tribes back from exile. That was Yoshiyahu. Yoshiyahu ruled for 31 years. And then he was killed tragically in battle, as we spoke about last year. And after him, 3 of his sons and 1 of his grandsons ruled. You have Yehoachaz for only 3 months, and then he's replaced by Yehoiakim, an evil king who ruled for 11 years. And then when he died, he's replaced by his son Yehoiachin for only 3 months. Yehoiachin is then taken to Babylonia as the beginning of the exile, and a lot of the people were taken with him. And finally, Tzidkiyahu, the youngest son of Yoshiyahu, rules for another 11 years. If you add all of this up, right, so we had 29 years of Chizkiyahu, 55 of Menashe, and then if you add 2 and 31, and another 22 plus a couple of months, you get to about approximately 55 years as well. Okay, that's the time frame. Chizkiyahu, Menashe 55 years, Yoshiyahu and those who come after him another 55 years, and then the Churban. The reason I gave you this background is that I want to look now at another great leader who lived through all of these events. And that's the prophet Yirmiyahu. Like Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai after him, Yirmiyahu Hanavi lived in Yerushalayim in the era leading up to the Churban. The first pasuk that we read on Shabbat, right after Shiva Sarbatam, was the first of the Shiva de Puranuta, the first of the Haftarot of the 3 weeks, tells us that Yirmiyahu began, not the first pasuk, I'm sorry, but the first parak tells us that Yirmiyahu began his prophecies in the days of Yoshiyahu Melech Yehuda. Okay, so Yirmiyahu begins here, somewhere in the days of Yoshiyahu, and he prophesizes all the way till the Churban itself, and through the Churban and after the Churban. And so since we're going backwards, I want to look at Yirmiyahu at 3 different periods in time. And first I want to look at him at his prophecies after the Churban. In other words, when he was in the same situation as Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai was in Yavne. And that's during the days of Gedaliah ben Achikam. Okay, Gedaliah ben Achikam, who we commemorate, of course, on Tzom Gedaliah, the day after Rosh Hashanah, because he was assassinated, assumedly, on Rosh Hashanah itself. What happened? So we have the psukim here. Davar asher haya את השם אחר שלח אותו נבוזראדן רב טבחים מן הרמה בכחתו אותו והוא אסור באזיקים בתוך כל גלות ירושלים. They had destroyed the Beit HaMikdash, the Babylonians, and the people that were there were being taken in chains to Babylonia, and Yirmiyahu was in chains with them. And it sounds like, at first glance, like he was just being taken with the others, but if you read carefully, it's not true. Yirmiyahu was a free man. And if he was in chains, the commentaries point out it's because he put himself in chains. He said, if my people are going to exile, Yirmiyahu was respected by the Babylonians. And he said, if my people are going into exile, I'm going to go into exile with him. So he put chains on himself. And he went there with the people. But at the orders of Nebuchadnezzar, the Rav Tabachim, the chief general Nebuzaradan, came to Yirmiyahu, and he said, listen, we respect you. Hinei pitachticha hayom min ha'azikim asher al yadecha. I have taken the chains off your hands. I'm taking you out of the handcuffs. And you are a free man, Yirmiyahu. You can do what you want. Im tov be'einecha lavo iti bavel bo. If you want to come with us to exile, you can come. You don't have to go in chains. If you want to accompany your people, you will come with me as an honored guest, and you can lead the people in Babylonia. I invite you to come with your people to exile. Or, but you have the right to stay here. And if you do, you won't be the only one. Even though almost all the people are being taken to exile, there are some people, the poorest of the people, that were being allowed to stay. And Yirmiyahu gets a nevuah here. He's told by the general El Tov ve'el hayashar de'enecha lalechet sham alech. And now comes the nevuah v'aldena lo yashuv. Don't go to Babylonia, Hashem tells him. I don't need you in Bavel. I have a different prophet there. Yechezkel is there. I don't need you in Bavel. I need you to stay here in Eretz Yisrael. V'shuva el Gedaliah ben Achikam ben Shafan asher hifkid melech Bavel be'arei Yehuda v'shev ito b'toch ha'am. Stay here with the people. Vayavo Yirmiyahu el Gedaliah ben Achikam ha'mitzpata v'yeshev ito b'toch ha'am ha'nisharim ba'aretz. And Gedaliah was appointed as a governor. And he takes the people to a place called Mitzpah. And he gathers the people together there, somewhere near today's Ramallah. And he gathers the people, maybe inside Ramallah, maybe outside. And he gathers the people together, and he tells them, all is not lost. Shvu va'aretz ve'ivdu et melech Babel v'yitav lachem. And Yirmiyahu is there supporting him in this idea. What were they basically saying to the people? if you think about it, what Gedaliah and Yirmiyahu were saying to the people at this time after everything was destroyed is the same thing that Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai said in Yavne. All is not lost. We don't have our king and we don't have our temple, but we can stay here in Eretz Yisrael and we can continue to live here. So we see that Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai wasn't the first to do this. And even after Gedaliah was assassinated and the people decided they have to run away to Mitzrayim, Yirmiyahu tried to stop them. He said, stay, accept the rule of Bavel, and everything will be okay. But unlike Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, who we really only see, as far as I know, what he did at those years right before and after the Churban, Yirmiyahu was prophesizing for decades before the Churban. And I want to go back to two earlier periods in Yirmiyahu's life, when it was a time of calamity, but not yet of Churban. We go back to the days of the king Tzidkiyahu, who ruled for those last 11 years. Even as the Babylonians had surrounded the city, and there was a siege, and it looked like all was lost, we have here a nevuah from Perek Lamed Chet of Yirmiyahu. Vayomer Yirmiyahu el Tzidkiyahu, he says to the king, Ko amar Adonai Elohei Tzvaot Elohei Yisrael, Im yatso tetzei al sarei melech Bavel, v'chayta nafshecha, v'ha'ir hazot lo tisaref ba'esh, v'chayita ata uveitecha. You can still stop the Churban. You have to surrender to the Babylonians, and that means, Tzidkiyahu, you have to give up being king. We have to accept the fact that certain aspects of the Churban may be unavoidable. In other words, we're going to lose our sovereignty, at least for a while. But if you go out and surrender to the king of Bavel, first of all, you personally will be spared. You will not be killed. And the city won't be destroyed either. The Mikdash won't be destroyed. But if you don't go out, then it's all over. And tragically, Tzidkiyahu didn't listen to Yirmiyahu, and the Churban came. But even right before the Churban, Yirmiyahu was saying, look, it's still possible to prevent the destruction. But his message here is a complex one. In a few minutes, we're going to go back to it even earlier stages when Yirmiyahu, and even we're going to go back even earlier, but when they said that the Churban is completely avoidable, here he said certain aspects can't be changed anymore. We're going to lose our sovereignty and our independence, at least for a while. But what was he offering Tzidkiyahu? I'll tell you what he was offering him. We can get to the stage of Gedaliah ben Achikam without a destruction. Or you know what? We can get to the stage of Ezra and Nehemiah without a destruction. Ezra and Nehemiah came back to build the second Beit HaMikdash. There was no Jewish sovereignty anymore, but they built the second Beit HaMikdash, and for most of the period of the second Beit HaMikdash, that's what happened. We were ruled by Persians, by Greeks, by Romans, except for a brief period of Hashmonai independence. We lost our independence, but we had a Mikdash that could have become maybe the third Beit HaMikdash. And he's saying we could do this even without a Churban. And if we go back even earlier in Yirmiyahu's life, though, to the days of Yoshiyahu, here, I won't read this whole prophecy. I believe I spoke about this also 2 years ago when I spoke about Yoshiyahu. But several decades earlier, Yirmiyahu was not only saying that the Churban can be avoided, that there doesn't have to be a destruction at all. This was a time of calamity. Many terrible things had happened. The 10 tribes had been, the whole northern kingdom had been destroyed decades earlier. People had been exiled. And Yirmiyahu calls upon the people to repent, and he says, in the aftermath, not of Churban, and here's where things are switching. Here's where we get to the difference between Kfar Aza and all the earlier parts of that open video that we started with. What's being said here is, first of all, calamity happened, but this calamity does not need to lead to total destruction. Shuva mishuva Yisrael ne'um Adonai. Lo apil panayim bichem. I will not destroy you. If only you repent, if only you make the changes that are necessary, I will not destroy you. But not only that, Yirmiyahu actually said something more dramatic. By Amim Ahema, if you'll just do that, if you'll just do tshuva, not only will the destruction be completely averted, but by Amim Ahema Yochu Beit Yehuda, Beit Yisrael. Now it won't just be Malchut Yehuda, Beit Yisrael. Those 10 tribes will come back. V'yavo yachdav me'eretz tzafon ala aretz asher hinchalti et avoteichem. What we, in our language, we don't have to talk about the second Beit HaMikdash, not only because the first one won't be destroyed, but because we don't have to go through a churban at all, and not only that, the calamities that have occurred can be reversed. The northern kingdom that was destroyed can be restored, not as a separate kingdom. Those 10 tribes can come back from exile. In our language, Yevot HaMashiach can happen now. Yoshiyahu could become the Melech HaMashiach. That's what Yirmiyahu said. 2 years ago, we spoke about why it didn't happen. But look at the change of Yirmiyahu, who in the early years was talking about Yemot HaMashiach. By the time in the days of Yoshiyahu, by the time he gets to the days of Tzidkiyahu, he's telling him, you're going to lose your kingdom, but the Churban can be avoided. And in the days of Gedaliah ben Achikam, he's already like Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai saying, okay, the Churban's finished, now we have to move on. But here we can already begin to see that not every calamity has to be a Churban. The terrible, terrible things can happen. Destruction, death of people, destruction of families and destructions of communities and cities. But it doesn't have to be a total Churban. And not only that, we're seeing something else here, that from the seeds of calamity come redemption. And that was the same Yirmiyahu who eventually had to predict that Churban and live through it. That same Yirmiyahu had earlier been telling the people that from the seeds of destruction can come redemption. And he wasn't talking only in theory. With that, I want to go to one last prophet. Go back even earlier. Maybe I'll just remind you of the history here. Okay, so Yirmiyahu prophesied from the days of Yoshiyahu all the way through the Churban. Now we're going to go back to the days of Chizkiyahu. 150 years before the Churban, and at that time, Yirmiyahu hadn't been born yet. There was a prophet called Yeshayahu. We read from him this past Shabbat Chazon. And here's his first nevuah. And the first pasuk is important. Chazon Yeshayahu ben Amos asher chazal Yehuda v'Yerushalayim bimei Uziyahu Yotam Achaz Yechizkiyahu Malchei Yehuda. Yeshayahu starts even before my chart there. He prophesied for a very long time, over 60 years, in the days of 4 different kings, the last of whom was Chizkiyahu. And if you were listening in Shul this Shabbat to the Haftarah of Shabbat Chazon, so you saw that it was filled with scenes of destruction. Artzechem Shmama, Arechem, I'm reading here this pasuk. Artzechem Shmama, Arechem Srufot Eish, Admatchem Lenegdechem Zarim Ochlim Ota. Your country is destroyed. Your cities are burnt. Your land has been taken over by foreigners. V'notra Batzion Kisuka V'charem Kimluna V'miksha Ki'ir Nitzura. And all that's left of your powerful country is like a tiny tent in a field that the workers sleep in, and very, very flimsy and very easy to destroy. So Yeshayahu is describing here a scene of calamity, but not Churban. There still is Sukkah B'cham. Something is still around. And it's unclear in Sefer Yeshayahu when many of the prophecies took place. If this prophecy took place, was given, for example, back in the early days when Yeshayahu was a young man, in the days of King Uziyahu, then he was prophesying a future destruction. But many of the commentaries assume that this prophecy must have been given probably during the days of either Achaz or Chizkiyahu himself. Achaz is Chizkiyahu's father, when the Assyrians had already invaded. And the history here is that the Assyrians, who came before the Babylonians, had invaded the northern kingdom in several waves, with several of their kings, first Tiglath-Pileser, and then Shalmaneser, and then Sargon, and they eventually destroyed the whole northern kingdom. And then they continued in the days of Sancherib and invaded Yehuda as well and brought terrible destruction to Yehuda. As we're familiar with, and we'll talk about in a minute, ultimately Chizkiyahu merited a great miracle, and Yerushalayim was spared, but only Yerushalayim was spared. The rest of the country had been destroyed. And when we spoke about Menashe several years ago, I explained that Menashe, Chizkiyahu's son, was living in what we would call a post-Holocaust generation. The days of Chizkiyahu, which may have been when this prophecy was given, were days of calamity. And if we read the pasuk that way, as for example the Malbim does, this pasuk is at least part of it, is not predicting the future, it's describing the present. Now, your land is, much of your land is desolate. Cities have been burnt. Azekah, Lachish have been destroyed. And other cities as well. Not only in the north, your cities in Malchut Yehuda. And it looks like Churban may be imminent because the Assyrians are headed to Yerushalayim. And with that, I'd like to look at one particular nevuah of Yeshayahu. Yeshayahu Chaf Bet. Here as well, we don't have a direct explanation in the Navi of exactly when this prophecy was given, but there are good reasons to think it was given during the days of Chizkiyahu. In other words, the days that I just described, partially for reasons that I will make clear in a moment, but also because right after these psukim, there's a second nevuah, which I didn't put on the page because it's not directly relevant to us, but there's a nevuah that's directed against someone named Shevna HaSofer, who was an official in Chizkiyahu's government. So let's assume that that's when this prophecy is being read. Masa Gei Chizayon is a name that's used here for Yerushalayim. It's very interesting, and sort of not only very, very fancy, it's not the right word I'm looking for, tsiuri. I'm losing my English here after so many years in Israel. Very elaborate or flowery name for Yerushalayim, but it's a puzzling one. But for now, let's not get into that. And we have here a prophetic scene of a terrible Churban, and there's no way to read this other than Churban. He sees people going up to the rooftops. The city is filled with screaming, right? Like they dramatized in the first scene in the video we started with from the second Beit HaMikdash. You heard screaming in the streets. The leaders have run away, have abandoned the people. Cry. And it talks about how the enemy is actually broken into the city. First the enemy surrounded the city. The valleys around the city are filled with chariots and horses, and the enemy is banging at the gates. And what did you do? You started to build walls around the city. And you created this pool to bring in the waters within the city. And now with modern archaeology, we know we can walk through Chizkiyahu's water tunnel in the old city of Yerushalayim, Ir David, and it seems very clear to us that this is a direct reference to that, which is amazing in its own right, and that seems to be therefore why we can put this nevuah in that time period. Vayikra Adonai Elohim tzvaot bayom ahul levchi ulemispeid ulekorcha v'lachgor sak. And the people had prepared for war. They had built a wall, and they had counted their weapons, and they had built this water system. And God calls out to them and says, there's going to be a destruction. Churban. B'nei sason v'simcha. You guys are partying because you think you're going to survive. Harod bakar v'shachot son achol basar v'shatot yain. You're just celebrating, you're drinking, either because you think you're going to be spared, or because, famous words, achol v'shatot ki machar namut, eat and drink, for tomorrow we die. Either way, whether your celebrations are out of false sense of security or out of nihilism and despair. Either way, God says, this city is finished. So God predicts here a destruction. So we have a nevuah that's in the days of, it seems, in the days of Chizkiyahu, a good 150 years or so, or 130 years at least, before the Khurban. And we have a nevuah that describes the Khurban. And the commentaries, almost all of them, maybe all of them, interpret this as a nevuah predicting what's going to happen in the days of Tzidkiyahu, Yirmiyahu, Nebuchadnezzar. And I don't have time to go into it, we only have 5 minutes, but there are a lot of things here that seem to directly describe, like, for example, the reference to the leaders running away. That's exactly what Tzidkiyahu did. He escaped from the city and ran away and was caught by the Babylonians at Jericho. So that's how the commentaries understand this. But it's a little strange. Why does Yeshayahu, in a city that's being surrounded by the Assyrians, why is he giving them a prophecy telling them, well, by the way, in 130 years, the city's going to be destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar? That's not relevant to those people right then and there. And again, I don't have time to develop this. I gave a shiur elsewhere earlier this year where I also using some of the findings from archaeology to try to make this point more clear. To me, it's very clear. The commentaries interpret this prophecy as explaining what's going to happen when Nebuchadnezzar Melech Bavel destroys Yerushalayim, because that's what ultimately happened. That's when this prophecy was ultimately fulfilled. But Yeshayahu, I believe, wasn't talking about Nebuchadnezzar and Bavel. He was talking about Sancheriv and Ashur, and he was talking about the city that he was standing in. He was telling those people, the people who were eating and drinking for tomorrow we die, you are going to die tomorrow if you don't make a change. And if that's true, this is a prophecy that didn't come true. It came true eventually. But in that day, the disaster was averted. In other words, if earlier I showed you a nevuah of Yirmiyahu during the days of Yoshiyahu, at the beginning, when Yirmiyahu was still saying everything can be reversed and the Mashiach can come now in the wake of calamity, Yeshayahu was saying the same thing. But whereas in Yirmiyahu's time, his offer, his prophetic offer for the redemption didn't happen, if we're reading this correctly, in Yeshayahu's time it did. After this, we're told that Chizkiyahu prayed to God, and the calamity was averted. The calamity that had come before wasn't averted, but the Khurban was averted. Yerushalayim was spared. And therefore, I think this is the model and this is the message. If we go back to Amichai's question, aftermath, how do we heal after calamity? Not after Khurban, after calamity. We are today, Baruch Hashem, not in the situation that Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai was in Yavne, not in the situation that Yirmiyahu was in with Gedaliah ben Achikam. This is Yirmiyahu in the days of Yoshiyahu, or this is the days of Chizkiyahu and Yeshayahu. Terrible calamities have happened. Many, many people, I've heard from so many people over the last 24 hours. This is the first Tisha B'Av that I can connect in a way that I never was able to. This is the first time in our generation that we've lived through these events. My wife was at a shiur this past Shabbat. I wasn't there, but the woman who gave the shiur, Rabbanit Michal Nagain, asked the women who were there, it was a women's shiur, to read Megillat Eicha, and to just read the Megillah with your own eyes in the year 2024, with what we're going through now, and see how many of the psukim jump out at you. It's a scary thing to do. But if you want, between now and the end of the fast, open up Megillat Eicha and read it that way. So many of the psukim are talking to us. And that puts us in the situation of Yeshayahu here during this nevuah, or Yoshiyahu during the day, Yirmiyahu in the days of Yoshiyahu. Seeing that the threat of a Khurban is very, very real. We've suffered a terrible tragedy and things could get worse. We went to sleep last night wondering if that Iranian attack that they've been threatening is going to happen, and we're still saying what's going to be, what's going to be. And the threat of Khurban should not be taken lightly. Calamity can lead to total destruction, and it's up to us. That's the message of this Nevuah that was heard, and it's the message of, if I go back to this Nevuah of Yirmiyahu, to Tzidkiyahu, that wasn't heard. Or this Nevuah here, to Yoshiyahu, that if you just do tshuva, there can be a redemption. That's the situation we're in now. And I don't have time. I only have 1 minute, so I don't have time to develop this idea. But last year I sat here on Tisha B'Av, and I expressed what we were all feeling at the time, the civil war that we were in, or the threat of civil war at least, and the strife that this country was in, and the fears of what it could lead to. Tragically, on Simchat Torah, we found out what it could lead to. And then we saw that incredible unity. On Simchat Torah itself, the true face of Am Yisrael came out, and suddenly all those fights were in the background, and suddenly we were one people, and the Kiddush Hashem that followed the Chilul Hashem was amazing. And Biyachad Nenatzeh, it was all over the country.
Amen.
And now it's almost a year later, and the question that everyone's asking is what's going to be. There are those who think that we've lost the unity and that we've gone back to the way things were before. There are even those who think that things are even worse than they were before. I'm an optimist by nature, and I, for a long time, been arguing and saying, no, the unity's still there, and I believe it is. But just over the last few days, I realized that all sides are true. The unity and the lessons of October 7th are there. And at the same time, we're going back to the way things are, or even worse. And we're in a very, very volatile and dynamic situation. And with this, I will close. With this Nevuah of Yirmiyahu that's on the screen now. We are in the days of Yoshiyahu. We are standing with 2 rows in front of us. We're in the wake of calamity. And we don't have to do what Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai did or what Yirmiyahu did after the Churban. Baruch Hashem. The calamity of or the Churban is threatening, but it doesn't have to happen. And not only can future tragedies be averted, but actually, from the ruins of the calamity that we experienced, we have the ability to emerge into something much, much better. And we saw that this year. And that's the purpose of Tisha B'Av. The purpose of Tisha B'Av is to mourn the past in order to build a better future. And therefore, let us seize this moment now at these last few hours of Tisha B'Av. And let's end with this pasuk. Vayamim ha'hem. This is what Yirmiyahu told Yoshia. And it's true for us. Yelchu Beit Yehuda, Beit Yisrael, v'yavo yachdav me'eretz tzafon. The Jews who are still in Galut can come and join those of us that are here in Eretz Yisrael. This can happen in our generation. And from the depths of the calamity we're in the aftermath of this calamity, we have the ability to move forward to a much better future and ultimately to the coming of the Mashiach, which we're going to start talking about in the 7 Haftarot that we'll read from here on in. May it happen soon. Okay, I'm over time, so I will stop here and let the next speaker start. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Haifa. Thank